never tell if this thing is sitting right. Okay. Today's brief discussion will be on theology. Now, if you don't like hearing other people's opinions on the nature of the universe, God, what have you, bye. Now, the reason I'm having this discussion today is that I was just rereading a book by I don't know if you'd call him a satirist, but he's definitely insightful and funny. Is a guy by the name of Robert Fulghum, and he's been writing quite a while. I remember being 5 or 6, and my dad took me to one of his public readings in Portland, Maine, and it's stuck with me ever since. I just think he makes an incredible amount of sense, and he comments, I think, in a large part the same way I do. I mean, for all I know, I'm trying to be like him. With this not so much irreverent, but just laying it all out on the table and here's why I find it funny kind of way, and if you agree, feel free to join in and laugh with me kind of thing. So I was rereading this book, and it's one of his more recent ones where he talks about time he spends in Crete and just, certain religious comments or theologically related comments, because, Crete and Greece are very religious places. I mean, whether they outwardly practice their religion or not, it's one of those seats of faith, whether it's, Greek Orthodox or pantheism or anything like that. The land itself, I think, carries, now I've never been there, but I think the land itself carries a very inherent sense of connection to whatever you end up feeling connected to. And it made me think I should explain during one of these first video blogs so that you understand part of where my philosophy and my point of view comes from. Things you need to know about me. I grew up in a house with an agnostic, and my mother was born Jewish, raised Jewish, and a couple years before I was born, she became a Unitarian minister. And for the entirety of the 16 years I lived with my mother, she was a Unitarian minister, licensed, credentialed, the whole nine. I don't actually know if she spent any time in seminary, though. Now, I myself personally am marrying someone who is Jewish. So, of course, my Jewish grandmother is thrilled. But that aside, I personally don't practice my Judaism. Like, if you ask me what I am, I tell you I'm Jewish. I don't deny that's what I am. It's part of who I am. I like that it's part of who I am. There's a lot about Jewish faith and culture that I really like and respect. I just don't subscribe to the practices. I grew up with a mindset that said, you know what, none of this really makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, pantheism makes some sense. Polytheism makes some sense. So I'm actually Wiccan. If I were to describe my own religious state, I am a Wiccan. I believe in more than one deity. I believe in the power of nature. I accept karma as a valid statement of universal happenings. I do believe in reincarnation, and I understand that science isn't able to prove anything one way or the other yet. But I'm also a huge sci-fi fan and have seen every episode of practically every Star Trek, except Enterprise, because you do not start a Star Trek series with Rod Stewart. Sorry, Trekkie moment. That all having been said, there is one essential story that I've been trying to clarify and explain to friends and family for a long time that I find the Bible itself to be centered around. And it has nothing to do with, creationism or anything like that. It basically starts with the birth of Jesus. To Jewish people, Jesus is just one of our own. He's not the Messiah. He's just like a prophet, you know? Good guy, good family, good attitude, great message. Not so much anything more than that. Now, I have no very definitive understanding of most religious states of being. I'm not an expert on Catholicism. I'm not an expert on Christianity. I'm not an expert on Judaism. I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I'm an expert in knowing what I believe. That's it. But as the story of Jesus' birth and conception was explained to me in the one and only year I spent in Catholic school, because my mother was psychotic, an archangel came to Mary in the night and said, "You will bear the Son of God." And then she was, the pregnancy, and she had the child in the manger, and, the Star of Bethlehem, and everyone showed up to give him presents and stuff. And that's why we have Christmas. Like, seriously, that's my understanding of it. I freely admit I'm missing major details in all likelihood. But here's my theory. I don't necessarily, personally, believe the premise of miraculous conception. I mean, yeah, in the spirit of my own Wiccanism, anything is possible. But I think biology is biology, and I don't think you spontaneously become pregnant. I think what happened was this. Now, if you don't want to hear my theory, bye-bye. My theory is this. Mary finds herself pregnant after going... Now, let me actually back up one step. There's a young girl named Mary. She's supposed to get married to this betrothed of hers, Joseph. It seems like a good match. Everyone thinks it's going to go well. The families are happy about it. But Mary's scared. She's confused. She's never been with a man before. She doesn't know what to do. So what does she do? She goes to the person she gets the most counsel from, the local rabbi. And she says, what do I do? I'm terrified. I've never been with a man. I want to make him happy. I want to fulfill my duties as a wife. Now, this is, of course, several thousand years ago, so mindsets were totally different. And the rabbi says, well, you know what? It's safe. It's right for you to be scared. It's right for you to want to please your husband. It's right for you to want to make your family happy. You're a young woman. That's what you should do. That's what you should want. But one thing leads to another. They spend a lot of time talking. Push comes to shove, and then the next thing you know, she realizes she's pregnant. Now, I'll grant you that she probably discovers she's pregnant sometime after the wedding to Joseph happens. She goes to the rabbi for counseling a few weeks before the wedding. They have the wedding, and then she turns out pregnant. Well, she's got to say something. She's got to explain how she is, pregnant in a blink. So she goes to him and she says, I was visited in the night by one of God's angels, and I'm carrying the Son of God. He doesn't believe her at first. Joseph is a real guy. He doesn't understand. He doesn't necessarily believe that to be completely accurate, as much a person of faith as he himself may have been. And he goes around and he proves to himself that none of the other guys in the town have been with her. They're all surprised. They have no idea. They assume the child is his. And he doesn't think the rabbi would have done it because he's a rabbi. He's a man of God. There's no reason to suspect him. And so the story gets perpetuated. She was miraculously given this baby who's meant to be this magnificent figure. But I think it got twisted. I think originally someone knew something, but like all things, it gets spun. Was Mary touched by the hand of God? Yes, but not in the sense that God Almighty in heaven reached down via an archangel and impregnated her. I think it makes more sense to accept that as a man of God, the rabbi could be interpreted as touched by God. She was touched by this man who serves God, therefore she was touched by God. You know? And it makes sense to use the explanation of an archangel too, because obviously the rabbi isn't God himself. He's one of God's messengers, like the archangel. Now, could I be wrong? Absolutely. Absolutely, I could be wrong. Being that it was, again, several thousand years ago, 2.5, 3,000 years ago, there's no way to know. Short of extraordinary circumstances and provable science, you know, some sort of found documentation or something, we'll never know. This is my theory. That having been clarified, I have absolute respect for people who follow their faith. If you're Catholic, if you're Christian, if you're Buddhist, if you're Jewish, if you're Wiccan, if you're whatever you are, you're more than welcome, in my eyes, to have whatever faith you want. But the distinction there is faith, not religion. Okay? Religion is a structured order of rules, regulations, practices, and traditions. Okay? Religion is you go to this place, you perform these acts, and therefore you receive this reward as a result. Faith is what you personally feel inside about life, about why you're here, what you're going to do with your life, who's worth, you know, interacting with on that level of faith. That's not the same thing as religion. Okay, so let's just be clear. When I say faith, I'm talking about personal, spiritual, philosophical beliefs and understandings. I'm not talking about going to church. I'm not talking about going to temple. I'm not talking about meditation and prayer with the Dalai Lama. Okay? Although I do think the Dalai Lama is a man of great wisdom and faith who just happened to have been made the figurehead of a religion. So that clears up some of the points on faith and religion and theology that I wanted to cover, inspired by having reread one of my favorite books. If you get the chance to read Robert Fulghum, he's got a whole collection. I say do it. He's insightful, he's funny, he's witty. Yes, he's a Unitarian minister, but he doesn't make a point of his faith. He just relates things to it. You know, other things happen in life, and he says, which is, you know, important to me, given that I am this. So, I hope you've enjoyed this explanation and little discussion. Please feel free to leave your comments, questions, concerns. If you disagree with me, that's okay. Go right ahead and disagree with me. But you better have your argument together. Because if you come at me with stupid, I'm not even going to pay attention to you. Okay? So I'll talk to you all next time, and hopefully I'll have more interesting insights to offer. Peace.